Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tradesman Experience. This is the podcast built by tradesmen for tradesmen. My name is Josh, and in the virtual studio today, I have Valerie, who is the founder and CEO of Vitality CFO Consulting. Now, you've most likely seen a pattern over the last several months. We're talking more about money. And the reason we're talking about more about money is it is the lifeblood of the business. And if you are heavily money on one side, you probably lack culture. If you are heavy leadership and culture on one side, you may be neglecting your numbers. So we're working to bring people in like Valerie and Greg with True Pros and everyone that we've had on this podcast so far to talk more and educate us more about the money factor. So here is my conversation with Valerie. Please enjoy.
With habits, what are habits that you see in a business that either grow a business or ultimately, I don't want to use the word destroy, but let's say erode a business?
I would say putting your head in the sand, not paying attention to things, not reviewing, not looking at things on a regular basis. I think a lot of people, and it's very natural that you want to kind of shy away from something you're not comfortable with. And so rather than going, head in, it's like the cold plunge we were just talking about. Nobody wants to get into a tank of cold ice water, but it's being willing to do that and go and do what you don't want to do, what you're not comfortable with. And I think that philosophy kind of applies across the board. And of course, I can always get into more specifics when it comes to like the finance side and accounting and what I see. But that's the bulk of it, is they're just kind of shying away what they're not comfortable with. And for most business owners, that's the accounting department. That's the finance world.
Yeah. I've learned I've never done anything uncomfortable and felt bad on the other side of it. The cold plunge, learning something new, sitting down and actually going through numbers or overhead operating expense. It's, for me, being hands-on blue collar, the process is never enjoyable, but the result is, and how you feel at the end of getting that done. You step back and you go, okay, it wasn't as hard as I anticipated, right? And now I'm better equipped.
Right.
So financially, you kind of made the joke. What are some of the financial habits or mishabits that you see?
I would tell you, just right off the bat, just ignoring it altogether is probably the worst mistake you can make, of course. Or assuming that the person that you tossed it to, and I run into this quite a bit, is people will hire their tax accountant to say, okay, well, just handle my books for me. It's easy. Just, do that QuickBooks thing, let things upload, and just run with that instead of actually taking the time out to learn it, understand it, or even hire someone that can dive in and digest it for you and make it into data that actually provides you information. And just, they just put their head in the sand. Once a year, they talk to their tax accountant and how much taxes do I owe and how much money do I have in the bank? And that's not going to help you grow your business. And it's certainly not going to help you project forward and prevent some of the worst mistakes a company can make that will cause it to go bankrupt very quickly. And they're not paying attention to these things. And then they say, okay, well, what happened? I was making money, but what happened? I thought I was doing well. So it's, having that visibility ahead of time from a finance view is probably, one of the best things you can do to grow your company.
I'm going to lob you a softball here, Valerie. Can you control your business without knowing the finances?
Absolutely not.
So now I want to tell you why I asked that ridiculously simple question, is because my ignorance and neglect in the financials was one of the reasons I ended up losing and leaving my HVAC company. One, I didn't know what I didn't know. Mm-hmm. I came out of a tool bag into this business owner position, and we grew super fast. When I stepped on board, we already had four employees, and then it was 5, and then 6, and then within 2 years, 3 years, it was 17. And revenues are growing, systems are growing, not well enough. And the second part was I trusted someone else to make financial decisions on my behalf, but
Mhm.
also that would be good for me.
Mhm.
And, that ignorance and that neglect, again, ultimately was my demise. I think it's interesting now going through that for years, having that experience. I think it's interesting of how easy that is to do for small business.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, that's generally the people that I work with. These are people that they're blue collar workers. They understand a skill and a trade, but they don't necessarily understand business, and they certainly don't understand accounting. Just
Mhm,
and I'm talking in general terms. Most people don't. They put all of their efforts into learning their skill, into learning their trade. And so when it comes to that, that's what comes back to, just avoidance and not having, not wanting to face it and not wanting to put forth that effort into trying to understand it.
mhm,
And then certainly putting your trust into someone else that they're just going to quote unquote have your back. It doesn't always work out that way,
mhm,
unfortunately. But when you have someone that you're hiring in, that is their expertise, and they're presenting this data to you, and you're having these meetings with all the parties in the room, and it's a third. I always say third party. They have no ties to this. They're going to give you the information how you need to, see it, and that's going to help give you the information you need to drive your business forward, or make the decision on when it needs to stop, or when
mhm.
do you guys need to part ways, or just having that visibility is so important. And those are the type of people that that I like to work with,
Mhm.
because I recognize that, and I recognize that need.
I wanna get into what those conversations look like, but
Yeah.
first I wanna jump into let's talk about Vitality CFO Consulting, your
Oh,
company. I
yeah.
wanna let's talk a little bit of, like, how the business came to life, why this is your career path, and because I know in conversations that we've had, you're very passionate,
Yeah.
and a and another term is you're very compassionate about
Yeah.
working with people and what they do. So where did Vitality come from?
Honestly, I've gotten just years and beyond, that I want to admit to, a lot of years just working in several different industries as an accountant. I'm a CPA. I started off very, very, very low level of just learning basics right out of college. But even prior to that, I think it's important to know, and some of where that compassion comes from
Mhm.
is I grew up in a blue collar home. My dad was an air conditioning technician. He worked on residential and commercial, and I would be volunteering to be his right hand man, to go and help him and go into the attics, sweating your butt off in Texas, heat, going on
Yeah.
roofs, to help them. And for my dad, it was as simple as, hand me this tool or get your hand in there because I can't, and screw that in or whatever. I would do whatever. So my dad was working in this industry, and at one point had his own company, and I saw how he struggled, and he's not an accountant. And
Mhm.
so, I would try to help him as much as I possibly could. So my own personal background comes from people who are working in trades. So my heart goes out in that aspect. And the best thing I can do to those types of people that's my roots, is offer a service that will help them. And so I'm just really passionate about that, about helping in the aspect of the CFO level analytics, management reporting, uh, cash flow analysis, things that they don't normally get from a tax accountant who's just,
Mhm.
doing a data dump in their QuickBooks. They're not getting that level of information. And I want to bring that level of service to those types of, people and businessmen. Because I know what my dad went through, and I know what he struggled with. And so the best thing I can do is offer my expertise to those individuals. And so I'm very, very passionate about that.
I think what that offers is you have this position that you're filling, right? The bookkeeping,
Yep.
but you're also coaching people at the same time. And I think that is a tremendous separator from a lot of the, day-to-day bookkeeping tasks and people that serve that role. Nothing wrong with that role. I have a bookkeeper,
Mhm.
but when you're able to lead people and coach people and at the same time providing the service, that's what really elevates. That's what
Absolutely.
that's what really allows people to grow. And anytime I work with a company and I tell everybody this, every business needs 6 people behind the scenes. You
Mhm.
need a CPA, a bookkeeper, an attorney, a banker, an insurance agent, and a coach. And every company, regardless of your size, even if you're a single owner operator, those are the 6 Wizard of Oz's. Those are
Yes.
the people behind the curtains that nobody else sees that are all going to help you make strategic decisions. They're going to help you plan growth, taxes, spending, accounting, saving. And honestly, if you were to strip most of those away, I'm going to pick a bookkeeper
Mhm.
because that's going to be the closest relationship out of those 6. That's who you're probably going to spend the most time with on making those not only strategic calls, but the tactical decisions as well in the
Right.
financial movement of the company.
Right.
So I love your approach of like adding the coaching aspect as well.
Yes. And basically, what you just defined is a board. You just
Yeah, I
defined a
never thought of
board.
it that way. Yeah, I never
And
thought of it that way.
when you have any successful company that you look up, they have a board. All of them do. Now, you don't have to be quite so formal and call
Mhm.
it this, but every business does need that. And I think that that's the biggest piece that's missing from the puzzle. You'll get your certain people to help you along the way, but you don't have you know a person that's coaching and helping on the data and driving those results and helping that process come along.
Mhm.
If you look at anything that's been successful, they have a really good board behind them. And so that's the level of services that Vitality brings to the table. We can do bookkeeping, of course, if that's needed. A lot of times clients have their bookkeeper and they're happy with them, but they don't have the CFO. They don't have
Mhm.
that uh, numbers driven coaching available to them. And so that's where we step in and we fill that gap. And whether you come with Vitality or whomever, I think that's a really important piece to the puzzle that every company needs, especially when you're going through growth. So one of the things that you mentioned is going through growth. It ended up, several things, I'm sure it wasn't one thing, but several things led to the demise of the company. And one of the things that I've told other companies is going through your growth period can be one of the most difficult things you can do as a company. It's actually easier and to shrink, to
Mhm.
reduce. If you have something going on and you need to get rid of a product line, or maybe a COVID happens and you need to start, it's really easy, especially to look at your company and start stripping away things. But being able to strategically time your market, your product, your growth is so imperative to do that in the right order, in the right timing. Otherwise, it really can make your business go belly up very quickly. So you need someone who understands data in order to help
Mhm.
you make that happen.
Uh, Real quick, I wanted to just throw it out there. What does CFO stand for?
Your chief financial officer.
Okay.
So it's
Um,
basically your person that knows the accounting stuff, but they also know what I say is finance. And that's going to be your higher level thinking, your banking relationships, looking at your company as a whole, planning it out, long term strategy, things of that nature. It's so much more than just the accounting world.
yeah. And that's why I wanted to kind of define that acronym because there's a
Yes.
lot of people that don't know what the COO, CFO, CEO, they don't know what those stand for and they don't know, how to define those roles. I joke that, most business owners play 2 roles. They either play the CEO, which is the chief everything officer, or the CFC, which is a clusterfuck coordinator. And and that's it. That's what they do. That's the roles.
Gosh,
That's the roles they play.
I'm definitely going to be using that one going forward.
So
changing my title. There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Sometimes I feel like the CFC in a company. It probably should be my title, but no, I think it's important for people to understand what those roles are and how they're defined, because then they best know how to implement them in the company.
Yes,
My
absolutely.
experience with talking with bookkeeping, talking with accounting, talking with attorneys, all of this. I remember early on in my very immature years of business, the reason I didn't seek out these conversations and these people is because I was just afraid of looking ignorant. I'm just going to be honest. Like, I was afraid to look stupid. And obviously that's a pride thing, ego thing. But the other factor of that was I didn't know what questions to ask. And I would tell you that right there is some of the biggest feedback that I get from my clients when I start encouraging them for these conversations. They always say, I don't know what questions to ask. So how would you help navigate us in knowing what questions to ask?
It's funny because I'm going to kind of repeat back to you. I ask a lot of questions, and that's how I approach it. So I do have the background and the knowledge in working with several different companies. So there's certain things that I'm looking for when I'm reviewing a set of financials. But the best way for me to help a company is to come in and ask questions about that company. And so I'm going to be narrowing in on a couple of key things: their products, the cost for those products, what type of information do they have currently available to them. I'm going to be asking several questions about their market, their competitors. Where do they want the company to go? Are they wanting to grow it? Are they wanting to expand? There's some companies that they want to franchise their business. That's their big vision. Others, they like being local. So just asking a lot of questions back to the business owners is going to help me then review their financials in that light to see if they're going in that direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's where you kind of get more into my empathetic side. I don't come across or ever come in knowing more than my business owners. I know numbers, but I don't know your business. You do. And so we're going to work together in partnering up your expertise and what you know about your business. And then I'm going to do some data in order to either support it or go against it. And we're going to talk about why. And then how do we change that to move forward? So my approach is always to learn and then provide you the data that you need in order to support your business. I'm a supportive role. So I never come in as the person who knows everything, because I don't. I'm never going to say I know your company more than you do. But I can tell you based off of numbers if you're leading in the direction you want to go in. Is that fair?
Yeah. Where do you normally, you said you kind of dial in or focus in, where do you normally start with the numbers when you're working with people? Where is the area that you kind of focus on?
I'm definitely going to be focusing in on cash, depending on the company. And it really is depending on their revenue, what their positions are. So I'm going to pull your three main statements, which is your income statement. Some people call it a profit and loss, your balance sheet, and I'm going to look at your cash flow. And I'm going to focus in on these three areas very specifically. And some of them I'll be focusing more on than others. How healthy is your business? Do you have more debt? Are you paying more money out than you have in assets? How are you looking on your profit and loss? And then there's a huge difference that I always try to talk about with my clients is the biggest differences between a profit and loss, making money, so to speak, versus your cash. And so when we start looking at the ebbs and the flows of what's happening to your cash transactions, then it tells us a bigger picture of what's happening. What I see a lot happening in the service-based industry is we have all of these upfront costs. We have our labor, we have material, we have all these things that we're paying for, but then we might invoice the customer once the job is done, and then we might float them 15 days. Sometimes we even float them 30, depending on your company. So what does that mean? We have all these expenses going out the door today,
Mhm.
but you didn't get paid for it till 2 months later down the road.
Mhm.
So there's a mismatch on how your cash is coming in and going out. So you need a certain level of reserves of cash in your a bank account in order to float you. And then what happens is, and a lot of times with my tradesmen, is they have these seasonalities and they don't
Mhm.
take that into consideration. So what happens is you have a low, it's December, nobody's wanting to get work done during December because it's holidays, but you still need to pay your team.
Mhm.
So it becomes an issue. So what we do is we start putting in a plan on how we can adjust for these things. How can we plan for these things so that your cash is nice and easy and steady flow? And then knowing, hey, I'm going to have a lull, a seasonality. It's going to happen. Let's plan for it so that you're not, dipping into your own personal account, which I see a lot of my guys do.
Guilty.
Okay,
Guilty.
I need to float payroll, so we're
Yeah.
gonna, use our own cash, or worse, we're gonna go put it on a credit card at a 20% interest
Yeah.
rate. Okay, why would we do this? So, things like that, that it's really, really, really common in the service industry. But I'm gonna, work with you in your business and help put together a plan for things like that, and let's fix this. Let's make this better.
Mhm.
So that's just one of the areas.
Yeah. I've done that. I've given out Christmas bonuses from my own pocket,
Yep.
just because
Yep.
it was, again, poor planning, ignorance, neglect, all of the things that I'm guilty of. You said something a minute ago. You look at the health of the business and you
Yes.
mentioned debt versus assets. I want to go into that just a little bit. One is I want to define the difference between an asset and a liability, and then
Yes.
talk about what it is that you look at and what is it that you mean about the health of the business and debt versus assets.
Right. Okay. Um, the easiest way to talk about this is, I try to put it down into a personal level. So your assets are things that you, for the most part, that you physically own. It's tangible. It's something that you have. An asset could be your equipment. It could be a car. It could be cash in the bank. It's something that is of value that you yourself um, own as a business. And then you have your debt, you have your liability. And that is loans, anything that you owe someone. So when we use the case of, an invoice, that's the easiest way to look at this. You are you own your assets and your tools in order to go do the job, right? So that's an asset. But you owe your employee labor and wages. You're going to owe them money. So that's one of your debts. So that's your
Okay.
liability. And then maybe you took a loan out to even open your business. So you owe to the bank. So that's another liability. And so what I look at for healthiness is, do you have enough assets to offset those liabilities? And then we're also going to be looking again at cash. How is the cash flow laying out in order to settle this debt over time? And is there enough cash flow coming in? So there's a couple of different indicators that I'm going to be looking at, and those are the bigger ones, just to kind of give me that quote unquote healthiness of the business. So one of the things that we will do is offer a health assessment.
Hmm.
We can come in and get those 3 sets of financials and do some analytics, and then give you just a quick snippet of how healthy is your company? Are you healthy right now? Is there an area that you perhaps need to improve upon? And so that's one of the things that we offer, and is, to the service industry, is doing a health assessment of their
Mhm.
company. Does that make sense?
I love it. I'm processing, and I'm just trying to think of how many people I know need to have a health assessment on their business.
Yeah. So we go to the doctor once a year for our checkup. Why? You're going to get your blood pressure checked. You're going to get
Mhm.
this checked. You want to know your overall healthiness. Like, how are you doing? And if you have a high blood pressure, okay, let's change your diet. Let's start
Mhm.
doing some more cardio. And your business is the same way. You need to assess that, every so often, very periodically. And typically it's going to be at minimum once a year. So how healthy is my business? Am I on track to what I want to do? And this kind of ties back into the coaching on the aspect of, well, what are you trying to get to? Are you trying to expand? Are you trying, like, what is your
Mhm.
goal? What are you trying to do with this company? And then let's see if you're on track to to making that happen?
Yeah, just kind of, I'm digesting all of that right now. Um,
I
I,
equate a
I,
lot of things back to physical health and
I,
our bodies, on our healthiness, because to me it's all the same.
I do the same thing because I completely agree. I think the physical health of the business, the financial health of the business is very similar.
Yep.
With us and that. The I wanted so the service-based industry is a little bit cash flow. Ultimately, is what I want to talk about.
Big.
Is cash flow? It's huge. The service industries, which I also come from, I was in the same industry that
Mhm.
your dad was in
Mhm.
HVAC,
Mhm.
and I recognized it with my company. I remember getting to a point in my business where, again, my lack of involvement with finances,
Yep.
so that it created this result. I remember my partner coming to me and saying, "Hey, we have a financial problem here. Our AR, accounts receivable,
Mhm.
is too high." I look
Yeah.
at it and it was around $400,000.
Ooh.
Now, a $400,000 AR on a company that only generates about 2 million in revenue. That's a
That's really high.
terrible. That's a really high. It's really high
Mhm.
percentage. So I start looking at where that money is, why the AR is so high, and what I was learning is couple things. One is my service technicians and maintenance technicians weren't collecting every call. So we would go out and do a job and then maybe they weren't home. We didn't set up expectation of payment. Something happened. And then the moment that we leave, we are now financing that call.
Yep.
So not only are we eliminating cash flow, we're financing the job now at 0%
At 0%.
for 30, 60 days.
Mhm.
And then I had to start looking at our install department. Okay, what are we getting for deposits? Where are we at in phases of building? And I kind of had to break that down and then approach it with a solution and go, okay, how can we not only minimize AR, but how can we increase cash flow?
Yep.
In a service-based industry, it's really easy to look at that. In a project-based company, large fabrication businesses, construction, what's your recommendations or suggestions on increasing cash flow for these companies that focus on long-term projects?
On long-term projects, it's a little bit different an animal. You usually do things in construction phases. And so what you're basically going to be doing is setting out a projected cash flow for each of those phases and then making sure that the funds that you have to fund that project, and it could be from the client themselves, it could be funded by a bank. There's various
Mhm.
different scenarios here on who would be funding that, but then outlaying that according to the timeline of how the project is going to progress. And so that's when it gets really, really important on that timing of cash and project and being able to marry that up. Because what you don't want to do is be overdrawn and you're not in the phase where you can actually even ask for more monies. And so that becomes a very, very significant project to work with your accountant on in terms of cash flowing it according to a project.
Mhm.
And I would say it's a little more granular of a level, but it's not too terribly different from your service industries. So, and one of the things that I wanted just to kind of add to your story, quite often what I have found is this is a process issue.
Mhm.
So we have to dig into
Preach, sister, preach.
we have to dig into what the process is. It's not necessarily an accounting issue. And
So
I always love that. They're like, well, this is the accountant's fault. Why are our books look bad?
yeah.
I'm like, well, no, not necessarily. Your accountant is going to be, their job here is to point things out to you. Their job is to show you that there's an issue. Then we got to figure out why is there an issue. And a lot of times it's your process. And so what we're going to dive into is it taking you too long to bill? Or do you have a billing issue?
Mhm.
Is it taking you too long to collect? Is there a collection issue? Who's in charge of collections? How do you collect? And then all the way back to the initial conversation with the client. Did we establish the payables up front? are we asking for a deposit? So a lot of times when we find these and we look at the assessment of the business and the health of it, it's going to open up a can of worms on, okay, well, what is your process? And of course, I love the answer. It's typically, well, we don't have one.
We don't have one.
We don't have a process. Or, well, I usually do this. So-and-so kind of does it this way. And so because they grew too fast and they didn't have that level of foundation put into place first, they start having these issues. And so it's of course, in a perfect world, it would be nice to have all these things nice and pretty and set up in a pretty little bow before you got started. But in reality, it doesn't happen this way. I mean, who's going to go through the work of putting together these official documents and processes and procedures when they only have 1 or 2 customers? They're still trying to see if this business is even going to work. But once it starts working and building, now you're working in the business and you're like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? So, a lot of times it's like working with your accountant to identify what the issue is, and then having your accountant unfold, well, what is our process? And then let's figure out what's causing this issue and let's fix that.
Yeah.
And then we can fix that AR.
I think so many problems in a business are systemic. I think that's just the bottom line. So many problems. And my example of getting my AR, that was exactly what we did. I met with each department and I said, okay, this is now our process. This is our system.
Yeah.
This is our standing operating procedure of how we're going to do this. And it started with a phone call.
Yep.
And that phone call, we would set that expectation and ask it in a question, or a question similar to this. Valerie, how do you expect to pay today? Check, cash, or credit card? Check, cash, or credit card.
Yeah.
So it wasn't an open-ended question, or wasn't a yes/no question. It was a direct answer question.
Right.
And then we set the expectation of the diagnostic fee. We set the expectation that they would collect. We set the expectation of method of payment. And that immediately started solving our problem because now we have cash flow.
Right.
On the project side of things, I've worked with a couple clients, deposits. You have to get deposits. I had a conversation. I'll tell you about 2 conversations. One I had a few months ago, maybe last fall even. And his question was, hey, I'm struggling with cash flow. I'm working on these projects. Kind of brainstorming a little bit. And I asked him, I said, are you getting a deposit? And he goes, I don't know how to do that. I said, okay, great. So we just kind of talked about the language or the approach or how to set that expectation. He sent me a text message the next day and he said, that was the easiest conversation I've ever had. And they give me 50% deposit. And obviously, because in that world, people kind of expect to give you a deposit. I've got another client. This just happened within the last 2 weeks. Same thing, cash flow issues. Their AR is in the heavy 6 figures right now.
Oh, goodness.
And it came up and I just asked the question about deposits. And he looked at me and said, I can get a deposit?
Oh, no.
And I was like, what? First of all, I was like, what have I been doing wrong? Like, clearly this is not a conversation that we've had. And so they're in the process of developing the process right now.
Good.
Because now we're looking at, because some of their jobs are pretty wide ranging and percentage of deposits is going to fluctuate with size of jobs.
Correct.
You're not going to do a $2 million job and get 50% deposit. The percentage is going to be smaller. But if you do a $5,000 job, you can get a 50% deposit.
Right.
But it's just the fact that there's no system.
Right.
There's no process. There's no way to set expectations. And the other thing is they didn't know it was an option. So, reeling it all the way back to, let's just call it that primitive or that elementary understanding of cash flow and sales. I think it's just so important that, because that's where it all stems from that. And my last point on that is you can have a successful looking company with $500,000 in AR. If you have no cash flow, you're going away. You're dead.
You're dead. To add to that, though, what goes through my mind is taking that now. First of all, I agree with you, but let's take that to the next step.
Okay.
And my mind immediately went to, okay, well, how much are you asking for a deposit? How do you know how much you should be asking? And yes, it is largely dependent on that project, the cost
Mhm.
or the size of the project, the scope. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. But one of the factors that I want to make sure that we do mention is costs. If you can cover those costs through your deposit, you just eliminated a cash flow issue.
Mhm.
You got a deposit before you went out and expensed and bought the material. You got that deposit that'll cover, all, if not some of your labor costs. Then when you get paid, it's basically bottom line profits.
Mhm.
So you just eliminated a cash flow issue by asking for, not only asking for the deposit, but making sure that you're asking for the right amount,
Mhm.
which leads us into a costing conversation. So when you're in the service industry, how are you costing things? How are you, are you doing a markup? How are you doing it? When's the last time you looked at your labor rate that you're quoting people in comparison to what you're actually paying? So one of the things that, I just recently was working with a company is, looking at every single employee and all of their billable hours versus unbillable hours. What is this really costing us to have this labor? And then what are we charging? And is it actually enough to cover all of these costs? And so a lot of what I see a lot of my service industry guys do is they have it all in their head and they're like, oh well, we typically just spend, charge X amount of, that's what the market holds, or they have like this number that they came up with, and I'm like, okay, well, what do you have that supports that? What do you have that's supporting that number? When's the last time when you did the analytics to know that what you're charging is actually going to cover all of your costs? And then furthermore, how many hours do you need to just cover your fixed expenses? And then
Yes.
okay, so we have 20 hours on the week. Every hour we now are billing forward is going to go towards the bottom line because we just covered costs. Like, do you know what that number is? How many hours do you need? So being able to dive in those directions on the costing side, I think is really important, and it helps you drive your business. And then going into even further, that point is then finding out which jobs are actually delivering you more money. So we start looking at margins. We start looking at what it costs us to do these types of jobs. Do we need to be pushing more on on our ACs? Do we need
Mhm.
more complete installs? Do we do better on that? Or do we actually do better when we're just repairing a compressor? Like what are we doing better at? What's going to bring us more bottom line? What should we be pitching to,
Mhm.
to hoping to grow in our business so that we can actually make more money? Because at the end of the day, we're here to make money, right? We're here to make a profitable business. So, that's the kind of stuff that comes to
Mhm.
my mind immediately when I hear you, talking about these things. I get
No,
excited about it. Sorry.
I know you do, and I'm glad, and you can go as far down these rabbit holes as you want because that information is so value. And the other thing is, I think it's important that we go down these rabbit holes because
Yeah.
there's so much communication in passing about finances.
Yeah.
Nobody stops and takes the time, and I'm guilty of this, takes the time to explain to people why these things are important. People
Yeah.
hear all the time, you need to know what your overhead is. You need to know what your daily break even is. You need to know what your profits are. But why? Why do I need to know this? How do I calculate these numbers?
Right.
How does it help me make better decisions? Because job costing, so you kind of reference job costing a little bit,
Yes.
right? So what did you think? What did you propose? What did you say the job is going to cost? And then at the end, what did it
What did it actually
actually
cost
cost you?
you? Yeah.
Including labor, including cost of goods sold, including your overhead. And how do those 2 line up?
Yep.
So many companies never compare those 2 things, and they operate in the pit, the PIT, the profit in theory.
Yep.
And they look at their P&L, which data in, data out, right?
Hmm.
Quality of data
Hmm.
in is quality of data out. They look at the P&L and go, "Oh, yeah, we're doing 27% profit." In theory, where is it? Where Where is it? Is it in your bank? Is it in a safe? Is it in your desk drawer? Where's that 27% profit? There's nothing. There's no money in the bank. What are some of the I'm gonna air quote here for people that are just listening to this. What are some of the hidden expenses that you see in businesses that consume that profit?
I would say inefficiencies of time is probably a big one.
Unbillable hours.
Unbillable
Oh my
hours.
God, it's the worst
And
one.
what I find interesting is most people just don't even look at it.
Mhm.
So let's say you've grown your business and you've hired on labor. How much of their time is actually productive work producing money? And then comparing that to how you, as you just said, if you projected, okay, this is 2 hours of time, so I'm going to estimate it $95 an hour. I just bid this job out for that amount of money. And it took my guys 3 hours.
Mhm.
Well, you just ate into the amount of money that you thought you were going to make, but you didn't make it because you spent more time, but you didn't catch it because you never really looked at what their billable hours are. And then it can go into a deeper hole.
Mhm.
How much time are they spending driving, prepping their truck, going to a meeting? Oh, we have to do this safety training. All of these things are things that are costing you money out of your pocket. Have you considered that? And that's when you go into what you just said, understanding overhead costs. Because these are things that you have to pay for. You need safety, right? They have to be able to drive to the job.
Mhm.
But I mean, how else they're not going to just zap themselves there. So these are things that there's real dollars that are having to go out, that are coming out of your pocket. But did you actually take that into consideration when you put together an invoice and told your customer, I'm going to charge you X?
Mhm.
And that's why we get into what we call in accounting world your cost analytics, your job costing, your estimating versus actual cost. We got all these fancy terms, but that's basically the bulk of it. Am I actually making enough money to cover everything that's coming out of my pocket in order to make this whole business happen? So I would say labor is a big one, unproductive, and then not being smart about inventory. Let's jump in and talk about that.
Okay.
All right. So you're a construction company and you're going to have pretty much X, Y, and Z jobs, and you're going to need so much different types of supplies and material to do these types of jobs. Are we going to go to Home Depot or worse, Lowe's, more expensive, every single time we need material? Or are you going to actually buy some material at a cheaper cost in bulk and carry what we call inventory? So you basically have stuff you're going to be using. You bought it cheaper and
Mhm.
you got it at a lower rate than waiting for job by job by job. So little things that you can do in order to reduce your cost. And that's where, a good accountant, somebody who's good with
Mhm.
numbers, can start diving in and saying, this is the areas that I want you to clue in on. And then of course there's all the other stuff. There's things that we have to pay for when we're business owners. You've got labor. Okay. You're going to be paying for workers' comp. Something
Mhm.
could happen. You're going to be paying for insurance. You're going to be paying for perhaps a building, to have an office out of. So these are all expenses that we need to take into consideration. And it can, and you have to factor those things in. And that's what we call overhead. So these are things that we need to be looking at on a regular basis, and then making sure that billable hour that you're charging your customers is enough to cover these things. So we break it down and try to make it as simple as possible. But at the end of the day, it's about money in and money out.
Yeah. I'll share with you something that we did that ended up being a cheat code for us on inventory.
Mhm.
Was we had such a great relationship with one of our vendors.
Good.
Our daily parts, motors, capacitors, contact, like stuff that just daily revolved off on and off my service trucks. We had a consignment inventory.
Ah, nice.
It was, I mean, we had our big stuff, but our service parts, we were able to work out an agreement where
Yeah.
we worked on consignment, and it was
That's the best way to go.
it was amazing.
Yeah.
Everything was always restocked. We knew when we had to have our restock POs sent in, and that eventually transformed into them bringing in their own scanning system into our building, and
Mhm.
we just scanned the parts that we took off it, and it automatically uploaded to their system, and we got deliveries twice a week. So
Yeah, my next question is gonna be, did they give you good terms?
mm,
How often
so
did you have to pay them
yep,
for this
yep,
stock?
yep. Every 30 days.
There you go.
Yep.
So one of the things that we look at when we're doing a health assessment is the number of terms. So how quickly are you between the time you push an invoice out the door to the time it takes you to collect the money? If that takes you 30 days, then what we want to do is try to marry that with money going out the door. So anything that I need to buy in terms of supplies, materials, stocks, like what you just said, I want to try to get that as close to that 30-day range as possible. Because guess what? If money's coming in on the 30-day and it's going out on the 30-day, we just created a better cash flow system. So that's one of the things that we do look at doing a health assessment is the number of days things are taking
Hmm.
you on both sides. And that right there can help indicate where you can make some improvements. Consignment is that's like the best thing ever. I just love
Yeah.
hearing those words because it's just such a great deal, especially when you get it on a 30-day term.
Hmm.
That's just amazing.
And it took years to cultivate.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, I'm not going to say it's a great idea just to walk in tomorrow and go, "Hey, can we set up consignment?" We had a tremendous relationship, but we also had that loyalty factor. We didn't buy
Yep.
parts from anybody else,
Yep.
so I don't want to say we had exclusivity with
Mhm.
them, but we had a really close deal to that. It was, and the other thing was, why would we buy it somewhere else? It's on our shelf already,
Right.
you know, outside of maybe a guy being on a job site and there's a different supplier closer. But yeah, that was just one of the things that we were able to implement in our company to kind of help us manage a lot of those things. The other thing that we did was the rural area that we served, the standard market value, okay, of hourly rate, because there were still, I'm also talking 10 to 12 years ago. So
Mhm.
the hourly rate in that area ranged from about 45 to $75 an hour. And a lot of these
Mhm.
companies were charging hourly on service calls. We immediately come out of the gate with flat rate pricing.
Mm.
And our calculated rate was $150 an hour. And we went
Mm.
through everything. I mean, it wasn't just like, oh, let's pick a number. Like we went through the calculations and we went through the part markup with the company that was supplying us with the flat rate pricing. And we rarely had pushback on price. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I know at the capacity I work with businesses, charging what they need to be charging is always difficult. It frustrates me when I see a company that's really, really good at what they do and they make less money because they can do it faster and better.
Mhm.
So you're charging $100 an hour and this company's charging $100 an hour. Well, you can do it in 4 hours and they're saying 6. Why should you make less money for doing a better job, a better service, a better product faster?
Absolutely.
You shouldn't. You should be charging $200 an hour.
Exactly.
So when we calculated that out, um, it was interesting for me to see how easy it was to overcome this stigma
Mhm.
or this false perception of, well, you'll never get more than $70 an hour. Well, we're flat rating it. The other thing that allows us to do, and I know I'm going down this rabbit hole here, but the other thing it allowed us to do was we might actually bill for 2 or 3 hours in 90 minutes, right? If we're
Right.
changing one part that's calculated at a 45-minute change, another part that's at 15, well, there's an hour, and another part that's at 30 minutes, and it's an hour and a half, but we do that job in an hour. We work for an hour, we build for an hour and a half, and that you're profitable that way. You're a lot more
Absolutely.
successful that way. Your cash flow is higher that way. And I know somebody on here is going to go, "That's stealing." Well, you're an idiot. You don't understand the value of what you're doing. Like
Right.
for me to go well, we should charge less. What I'm doing is I'm devaluing my service. I'm devaluing my technicians. I'm devaluing the experience that we create, and I'm doing a better job for less money. So many businesses, Valerie, I see fall into that trap of doing more work for less money. What are the conversations that you have with them about increasing their prices and increasing their worth as a company?
And you're bringing up a lot of good points, and they all relate to probably the same answer, which is that's where I enjoy diving into those numbers and giving them the analytics on sometimes an invoice by invoice level. So one
Mm,
of the things I'm going to do is start pulling. I do my business assessment and my health assessment at that top level. Now we're going to start diving deeper, and I'm going to want to pull on a very specific invoice, and what I'm going to be looking for is just that. How much time is it actually taking? How much time are you actually spending? And doing those comparisons. Because what you're telling me is you were able to put this together because you knew your numbers. You knew it was going to take you an hour, and you could do a flat pricing, which, by the way, is not stealing. I'm a big fan, as a consumer myself. If somebody's going to come in and tell me it's going to cost you this flat amount, period, the end, I'm all for it, because then I have no guessing game. I know exactly how much I need to budget. So you're doing me a favor by
mhm.
letting me know ahead of time what my flat rate is. That's an amazing way to do business. However, to do that, you need to know your numbers. And then you need to be charting that data to making sure your guys aren't taking
Mhm.
longer than they should, which
Yeah.
opens up that same conversation we just had. What's your billable time? Are they
Yeah.
being productive or non-productive? You
Right.
can't put that flat rate pricing together and then have your guys go and spend 3 hours on a job, and
Yep.
you basically only budgeted for that to cost you 1 hour
Mhm.
in order for that model to work. So it all comes down to understanding your numbers first, so that you can put the pricing package together and then validate,
Mhm.
validate, validate. Like, keep validating and keep asking why and keep understanding any deviations from it. Why? And how do you fix that? And that's where you get profits. A lot of people are
So
missing out on that.
you're right, and we discovered that. We
Yeah.
implemented the system, and then we didn't track it.
Mm,
And once I had a few technicians on the road and we started tracking it, what we found is we were paying our guys for 8 hours of work, but they were only billing for 4.
hmm
So it comes back into, okay, well, what are we doing on these jobs, right?
Right.
In in HVAC terms, which it makes me so happy to actually get to talk to someone that has been around the HVAC world. Um, if I come out to your house, there's a diagnostic fee. I just find a bad part on the outdoor unit. I change it. Your AC works, and I leave. That, yep, I saved you money. Okay, I'm using air quotes again because I found the part, changed it. But did I check the indoor system? Did I check the filter? Did I check the thermostat? Did I have a conversation with you at all and go, Valerie, what rooms in the house are uncomfortable when it's
hmm
extremely hot or extremely cold? Um, so these repairmen get really focused on just changing the part that's bad,
hmm
whereas a technician is going to step back and go, okay, what other concerns do I see? What
Right.
concerns do you have? What other things can we offer you that's going to make you the most comfortable and most satisfied in your home?
hmm
And yeah, now we did find something else that is a concern on the indoor unit. And now you did invest in this.
Right.
So now that 4 hours billed a day is now 8, 9, or 10 billed hours a day, and we're paying for 8.
Right.
Just because we made a decision to add value, inform and educate, create the best experience, and be thorough in what we're doing instead of trying to hurry up and get to the next job. So I know I'm like on this HVAC service technician soapbox right
Yes.
now. But that's the reality of it, because if all you're going to do is show up every day, go out and change parts, there again, back to the cash flow aspect, is we were not making any money. We were losing money because I'm paying 8 hours a day plus workman's comp, plus overhead operating expenses for each technician, and
Yeah.
I'm only bringing in 4 hours billed.
Right.
It's a terrible recipe.
It is. And I think that goes back to a couple of things, knowing your numbers and having a process. And then that goes into having your board meeting. How are we going to tie that to a board meeting?
Mhm.
What do you want your business to stand for? Do you want to be the person that's just changing a part and moving along, or are you actually establishing a relationship? Are you the person, are you the company that's actually going to redefine that industry?
Mhm.
And so I think that's the key differences. And that's where you get into your board level meetings and partner that with your numbers and your data driven numbers in order to put together these plans that create a magnificent experience of a business. And that's when you become a differentiator. And those are the types of companies that are successful.
Mhm.
So I think all of these conversations, we can dive into numbers and talk very, 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 very nitty gritty down to pennies. And trust me, I chase pennies. Yes, I do. I'm an accountant. I can't help
Yep.
it.
Yep.
But at the same time, being able to extract now, let's pull ourselves out of these numbers and say, okay, what is this telling us? What does this mean for our company? And what kind of a company do we want to be as a whole? What are we trying to drive at? And then now let's go and create a process. So now you're jumping into making sure each technician understands and they're trained and they have a process. We're not just going to change a filter. We're not just going to change whatever. We're going to go in and we're going to do an assessment. We're going to do an evaluation and we're going to add value. And so I think all of these conversations are the conversations that you need to be having as a business owner with that board. That includes your numbers person. It includes, all of these different things that we just talked about when we first started our conversation.
Yep.
So I think it kind of comes full circle.
Agreed. I agreed. And to put a little, just to add the cherry to that is, I think that's so much culture
Yes.
in a business. I think all of that is culture. Culture dictates implementation. Culture dictates understanding. Culture dictates buy-in, leadership. I think it's important for the people in the company to know why we're doing this, to know why this is our process, to know why we're charging this amount of money.
Absolutely.
And a lot of business owners steer away with that. We're like, well, I don't want my guys to know my numbers because they'll just go out and start their own business. So what? What if they do? Who cares, right? You're so focused on a problem that you're killing your own business because you're worried that there's some secret that you have. The secret that you have is that you're just ignorant about business and you don't want to be discovered. That's the sad secret is people don't know. And I'm 100% guilty. I mean, I'm standing up here with my hand raised, like, yep, this is me. I made these mistakes with millions of dollars in revenue. It's a really sad thing. Since we've come full circle, Valerie, how can people find you? How can people work with you? Because I think it's important you work remote, right? You work with companies all over.
I do.
So you don't have to be in Texas
No.
to be able to work with Valerie. So how can people find out or connect with you?
Well, we have a website. It's vitalitycfoconsulting.com. And I'm sure we can get that, written somewhere. And that's the best way to get in touch with me. It's got all my information on it. It's got an email. It's got a health assessment questionnaire. You can go in and ask for a health assessment for free. So there's some valuable information out there, and that's probably the best way to get in contact with me with Vitality. But just to add to this, I think it's these kinds of conversations. I don't think our service industry guys are used to having. They're not used to having a board. They're not used to having a partner. They're not used to having someone that's going to help support them and grow their business. But that's what it's going to take to go to that next level. And creating that culture that you want, I think is so valuable. And the data can help create the culture too. One of the things that you mentioned on is, having those conversations with your team. I love establishing numbers and making it competitive and making it fun. So, my guys know how many billable hours they have. They know, what sales they brought in. Are they getting proprietary information? No. but we just created a culture. We made it competitive. We make it fun. They look forward to seeing the numbers and see, who beat who that week. And that's a part of that culture too. And that can all be, it can be data driven and also be fun. So I know people don't really think that, but accounting for me, it's fun. So I don't know about y'all. If you're not having fun with your accounting, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. It's important to make numbers sexy. It's important to make numbers fun. It really is. And something I've discovered is clients that I work with, when they get down this path of business and understanding numbers, they do become excited.
Yeah.
And they actually want to do that more than they work on the tools. Because now it's like, oh, this is the oxygen. This is the lifeblood of the business. How can I improve this? And it does become competitive. It does become a game because it's this, you're keeping score, right? If you don't know the numbers of your business, you're not keeping score.
Well, you just really segued nicely for my company and our tagline, which is it's always about the numbers.
Yeah, I love it. I have ideas of how you and I can work together in the future. So I'm just going to plant that seed with my listeners because there's so many things that you offer, but how you offer it and why, again, your passion, your compassion, your drive to do this. I think there's a really good pairing here that I would like to see how we can build on that.
Absolutely.
In closing, Valerie, anything you'd like to share?
No, I think we've covered it all. This has been amazing. I would just say thank you. I'm so happy for the introduction and how we've met and came together. This has been amazing. And I really look forward to, working with you further. And if you guys ever need anything, I'm just a shout away. So thank you for your time.
Well, Valerie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending this time with me. And thank you for adding a tremendous amount of value to my listeners. Guys, go check Valerie out. Check out their website. It'll be in the show notes. It'll be on all the social media postings. Until next time, get shit done.